Find out what's on TJC. Sign up for our bi-weekly email program guide at tjctv.com.
Welcome to the Salon. Coming up, is Congress endangering women's health? Why men dominate the magazine conversation? Has the rise of women turned men into boys? And does Mike Huckabee have a point about Natalie Portman's pregnancy? It's coming up on the Salon.
Hello, I'm Jane Eisner, editor of the Forward and Forward.com. Welcome to the Salon.
And I'm Rachel Sklar, editor-at-large for Mediaite.com.
So Rachel, it is Purim season, and it brings up this very important women's question. Who are you more identified with, Esther or Vashti?
Well, when I was a kid, I always liked to identify with Queen Esther, but as an adult, I feel a little bit more inclined to identify with Vashti, and actually, I would have identified with her strongly on set today, but they wouldn't allow me to do the show naked.
Aha. Okay. Well, here at the Salon, we are fully clothed and very grateful to have some terrific guests with us. Please welcome Kay Hymowitz. She is the author of the fascinating and controversial new book, Manning Up: How the Rise of Women is Turning Men into Boys, which we'll be discussing today. And we have Elissa Strauss, who is a regular contributor to the Forward Sisterhood blog, where she writes about marriage, gender issues, religion, and Latinos. And Barbara Dobkin is here too. She's a philanthropist and currently the board chair of the American Jewish World Service. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Kay, I thought we could start talking about your book, sure. Manning Up. You make a very interesting and somewhat discomforting argument that we are seeing now the sort of advent of the man-child in a kind of pre-adult stage. And this is in part occasioned by the way women have been achieving so much in education and in career and in public life. So what happens here now? Is the responsibility for men now laid at the feet of women's achievement?
No, I don't see this as a blame game at all. A lot of people have said, oh, you're blaming men, you're blaming women. I don't see it that way at all. I think that we're talking about these huge demographic and cultural and economic shifts that have really changed people's ways of thinking about how they're going to grow up and become adults. And what I'm trying to argue in the book is that for women in particular, this is working out fairly well, at least in the early 20s. The age of marriage is one of the reasons that we talk about this delayed adolescence. But for men, I think there's much more confusion about how do you become an adult? How do you become a man? Even the question of what is a man is under discussion.
Rachel, among the men you know, do you think they don't know how to be a man?
Wow. I hope none of them are watching, so I might speak freely. No, I think Kay's point is very interesting. You know, I know some men-childs. I know some, terrific, responsible adults. I feel like this is just, the manifestation of greater freedom and greater choice across the culture. Some people step up, some people don't, and that applies to men and women.
Yeah, I think that there's been such a change over time, and certainly late marriage has a lot to do with it. But women have opportunities that they didn't have, and they're not getting married early, so they are going after them. Men are just taking their time, some of them. And not only that, right now it's hard to get a job.
Well, I'm glad you put it the way you put it, because one thing that's kind of bothered me with the coverage of your book and Hannah Rosen's article in the end of Men, I thought to myself, I was like, why can't this be called just the rise of women, right? Why does it have to be framed always as a zero-sum game? Men up, women down, women up, men down.
Right.
And I think, and also, why is it men are reacting necessarily to women? I feel like, anecdotally speaking, what I see around me is maybe men are reacting to their fathers, just like I'm reacting to my mom and seeing the way she was trapped and stifled by staying home, taking care of us, having a part-time retail career. She's 60 now. It's not working out so well. She doesn't really have that many opportunities. Right. And maybe my brothers are responding to my dad about all this pressure to be a breadwinner, and they finally have a chance to sit back and take it easy.
Right. Well, you know, we go through life with various models, and one of them, of course, comes from our parents. There's no question that we are influenced by the way they've lived their lives and the way they've understood what it means to be a man or a woman. But we're also influenced by cultural and economic changes. And so, you know, certainly I got married when I was 21. It was a little bit young for among my peers, but my kids are not going to marry like that. Right. So they're not imitating me, right. Which is fine. I understand why. But I think we have to also recognize that there are certain problems that develop for women, by the way, because of later marriage. How many of us have met women who are talented, even brilliant, very successful and beautiful, and somehow they've reached 35, 36, and they can't find a guy.
I don't know anybody you might be referring to.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I really did not mean to personalize.
No. I'm just kidding. But as that person, or you know, adjectives notwithstanding, everybody can make
beautiful, talented. Absolutely, absolutely.
You know, you know, with all of the things that have changed, the basic reality of biology has not.
Exactly.
So there is that awareness, and so as women and men proceed sort of post-adolescence and, you know, post-college, you know, there is a inherent limitation on women and their family prospects that is not imposed on men. So that, I think, is one of the major roots of sort of the coverage of all of these situations. And there's always a woman in her 30s being covered or written about in national publications. There will be a discussion of her marital status, whether she has children, in a way that never is done with men.
Okay, I think there's a reason for that, though, and a good reason. I mean, the vast majority of women do want to marry and have children. I mean, that's just what the survey data consistently shows. Now we have this amazing success of young women, which I'm certainly not trying to take away from them, but it's equally important that they should find happiness in their personal, private lives as well. And I don't think we're doing as good a job on that end. So I don't think this is just a kind of sexist, we're always looking at women and thinking about their marital status. I think that is what young people want.
A good man-child is hard to find.
Yeah, well, exactly. I got married right out of college, kept him from Vietnam, did what I was supposed to do. And I do think that had it been a different time, and had I a profession, had I waited, that things would have been very different. I would have known myself better. I might not have chosen the guy I did. He probably wouldn't have chosen me. So I think that the more you know yourself, for women, the harder it gets to, especially if a guy is really mature, which many of them are, but the harder it gets to be willing to compromise some of those things.
Yes, right. I think that's true, too.
I mean, which is why I'm 31, I am married now, and I met many a man-child, during my 20s, but I didn't really mind, I mean, to be honest, because in a way, it's a good thing. Like, no one was under a pretense that they were looking for a serious relationship. I happened to not mind. I wasn't very boyfriend-focused. I had other ambitions and other interests. So I could, I was in hookup culture, and it wasn't, whatever. I mean, it's a lot grayer and amorphous than it's, I think, often described hookup culture. But I was okay. They weren't ready to get married. I wasn't really ready to get married. They stay as their, man-child, their men-child, and then finally they turn around a little bit around, end of 20s, and they're ready, and I'm ready. Yeah.
I think you're right. Most people will grow up and become sort of adults in the way that we traditionally recognize, but there are a significant minority that are not. And there is this problem for women that when they reach their late 20s and early 30s, and they are, in many cases, from interviews I've had, beginning to think, well, the time is coming and maybe I got to take things more seriously. Well, the men their age are starting to look at younger women. Yeah. And so there's a mismatch between the biology, which says, women have this biological clock and have a limit. We generally think about 35 or so in terms of when fertility starts to really decline, and the culture, which is saying, don't worry about that, just get your career underway. So I think we have to find some way of meshing those two things a little bit better.
I was really hoping that if there could be any salutary effect to this economic downturn, it was to help people realize that the sort of worship that we've had of career and career achievement may not necessarily be called for. But what do you think society can do about this? I mean, should we be raising our boys differently? I mean, is that part of, we can't legislate this, and we shouldn't legislate this.
Certainly not.
But
is the
how do
implication by raising boys differently that we should return to an era when men were men and women were women and everybody had their roles? Because that's
No.
I'm
not asking for that at all. No, but what I'm wondering about is whether or not that men have gotten too much of a buy. That it's just why bother to take on responsibility, because you can have a fun life without it, and yet our culture, especially our Jewish culture, needs men to kind of own up to what they should do.
It seems to me that if we had more collaboration in the house, I think that it would give women an opportunity to work as well as men have an opportunity to work. And hopefully society is eventually going to understand that nobody has to necessarily be any place full time. There is much more telecommunicating anyway, and that having children really can, I hope, at least fit into a work life. I don't know.
You've really hit it here talking about equal representation, because for all of the woe-betide young men and the rise of women, what we actually see in terms of the ratio of women in positions of power, influence, renown, is we still see overwhelmingly that those positions go with men. And I know, Elissa, that you wrote something recently about the overwhelming majority of bylines in major magazines going to men. If you want to talk about that and what your thoughts are.
And briefly, basically, it's something I started writing for the Sisterhood, the Forward, about a year and a half ago, and just, these things are in my mind more. I get my magazines every month in the mail, and I start doing the gender check, and after a year, I was like, all right, I think I see a pattern. I'm not a sociologist. And so I basically did a brief survey of the New Yorker, the Atlantic, the New Republic, and the New York Review of Books. And a couple weeks after I did my brief survey, and I wrote a post about it, and a couple weeks after I did that, an organization named Vita did a larger survey, and I excluded cultural criticism because I thought that my hunch was that I thought I saw more women's names in cultural criticism, and I thought the real problem was reported stories. But it turns out I was wrong, and it's bad all over. It's not much better in cultural criticism either. And I had waited, I'd gone on vacation for 2 weeks in South America. I expected to come back and hear something from somebody unpacking this or apologizing somebody somewhere, and nothing. It was silence across the board pretty much from the magazines that have, I think the New Republic 16%, New York Review of Books is 15%, Atlantic and New Yorker are both around 25%, and no one's expecting 50, no one's even expecting 40, but maybe 35%, it's so ridiculous in 2011. And so, so I went ahead and I wrote all these editors and asked them why they think this is happening. I ended up getting apologies, essentially, saying we really want to do better from the New Yorker, from the New York Review of Books, and from Harper's. And I actually got from the New Republic, from an editor and writer there named Jonathan Chait. He actually tried to unpack it a little bit, and he brought up that, what he thinks is that women aren't opinionated enough
or confident enough to put those opinions on paper.
Right. The White House Project, early on when it started, did a study of women on Sunday talk shows, on the news shows. And there were hardly any. And it has gotten a little bit better, but they talked to all the channels, they talked to all the guys. Everybody was going to do better. They have a huge list of names of people who are qualified to talk about almost any topic. And the problem is it's only we women who are counting.
Right.
Everybody has to be counting.
Right. And it's always the day after email, right? After you see the all-male slate.
Exactly.
On a Sunday show, or on a podium for a presidential debate. That's the the overarching image I remember from covering the 2008 election early on, was covering the Republican debates, and it was like 9 white men across the dais, and that's these are realities. So I run an organization called Change the Ratio. I look at ratios, and like you say, if it's not 50%, fine. But when it skews wildly to like 20% women, 80% men, across the board, then that's something we should be paying attention to, and women and men should be trying to change.
Yeah, and the Jewish community is not better in the communal world. And I do believe it's not that women are so different. Well, actually, I think we are different. but I don't think that if you have half the voices of a community missing, that you're going to have a good picture of what the community is and what it can be. And the Jewish community is very slow to promote women to the places that they need to be.
So what do we think about affirmative action?
Can I throw a kind of contrarian view in here? First of all, as you probably know, there was a study that came out recently about Wikipedia showing that that is predominantly male. I think probably similar percentages to what you're seeing at the New Republic. There are no gatekeepers there. I mean, women can write for Wikipedia as easily as any man can write for Wikipedia.
I actually have a theory about that.
Well, let me just make one more point. On a personal level, I always get a little uncomfortable with this because I feel like I've benefited from being a woman. I know I've been asked to sit on boards, for instance, because they need a woman on the board, and you know that they might not have asked me. And if anything, I find that in terms of the discrimination, I feel it much more as somebody who's labeled a conservative than I do as a woman.
You know, Rosabeth Kanner at Harvard says that if you don't have at least a third women on the board, that the women on the board are tokens. And I certainly see that. And it's clearly, I don't think it's just any women either. I think it's women who perhaps think differently or bring something new to the table. But women have to be at all the policy tables. They really do.
Well, I think that it's one thing to say there are a few women on this board or on the pages of that magazine. And then it's another thing to open it up so that you're getting true diversity. Because we don't all think alike. Witness this panel.
Right.
And,
exactly.
And we should have the opportunity to have these different voices. I've been operating in the world of opinion journalism for a very long time, you know, as editorial page editor of a major metropolitan newspaper, and now at the Forward. And I run into this all the time, and I think it's a combination. I think we journalists tend to go to the usual suspects who have been the usual suspects. I think in the Jewish communal world, it's especially problematic because most of our major organizations are run not just by men, but the same men for a very long time. And I also think women need to step up. I got to tell you, I've been writing opinion for a long time. It's not easy to put yourself out there. It's hard, and you got to have a tough skin, and you have to be sure of your opinions. And there, I think it's not so much ego as research and doing good journalism to make sure that you're sure of what you're saying, and be willing to back down if you made a mistake. And
right
and
there
I do think
is a key difference, though, in the research about women and men in that area, is that women are more likely to agree to go out on that limb and be an expert, have that opinion, if they are sure that they are right.
Oh, absolutely.
As opposed to, I mean, and this is research from SheSource, from Fenton Communications, that a woman is more likely to turn something down if she does not feel she is qualified to speak to it, and a man is more likely to assume that because he's being asked, of course he is qualified to speak to it.
It's really interesting. J Street just had its conference, and apparently there were about as many women this year as men. But when the microphones were open, the men were all up front. You wouldn't have known. And there was a question on the floor. The men, and this is clearly not everybody, didn't answer the question. I mean, they talked about whatever they wanted to. The women were very slow to go up because they're asked to do something. That's what they want to do, and indeed they want to do it well. I know, who's the person who's doing the op-ed training
Katie
now?
Ornstein?
Yes.
Yeah.
And when she comes into a group and says to very, very qualified women, tell me something you're good at. Whew, nothing.
So we want women to be more like men in this way.
No, we want them to
I
be
don't
more
think
confident.
So. Yeah.
Well, no, but
No, I don't want them to get up there and just give off the top of their heads. I want them to feel that they know something and they have something to offer.
Well, when they do, but you're describing a lot of men who actually don't know what they're talking about. And
I don't
still
want women
get
to
up
do
there.
that. I
No,
do not want women.
absolutely not.
I want women to push to the front because they know they know.
I have a mnemonic for that. Well, not really a mnemonic, but I'm not sure. I hope it's appropriate for the salon, but I just, when I give advice to women about doing it, I just tell them to like metaphorically imagine themselves swinging it around. So like just like that's what men do. Just imagine yourself doing that. I hope they don't cut that.
So what's your theory about Wikipedia?
Oh, the theory about Wikipedia is that because I just go by how I operate, and I've never wanted to contribute to Wikipedia because I don't care enough. There's not enough payoff. It's not, there's a high barrier to become part of that community. It's all anonymous, and like I feel like women participate in teams very readily, but as people identifying with other people.
Well, sometimes these things are theoretical conversations, and sometimes they really boil down to some hard issues. And there's one I'd like to bring up, and that is the whole question of abortion and reproductive rights. I mean, after all, we're now seeing in the Congress an attempt to, in the guise of cutting the budget, certainly trim back funding for agencies like Planned Parenthood. Now, federal money doesn't go to providing abortions in Planned Parenthood, but it does go to providing other things like prenatal care and contraception to, one might say, prevent abortion. So Barbara, what's actually happening now in the nation's capital? Have you been following this?
I'm a little worried. I mean, I really am worried. With this Congress, you just don't know what's going to happen. And to cut Planned Parenthood, let's forget abortion for the minute, but to cut Planned Parenthood is really going to be a loss for women. And bringing it back to the Jewish community, over the last, I don't know how many years, I think the Jewish community has been very quiet on this subject, except perhaps for NCJW that has somebody on the Hill.
That's National Council of
Jewish Women. And part of it is because some of the people who are really against abortion are really for Israel, and some of the major organizations are unwilling to take them on. And I've been disappointed in the Jewish community's response because we should be out there protecting a woman's right to choose.
You said, Rachel, that you were at a recent Planned Parenthood rally. What was that like?
It was great. If you were in the middle of it, you saw, thousands and thousands of women with signs and men too, and very passionate about protecting those rights. And then, and then you looked at the coverage, and there was hardly anything. Right. Exactly. I mean, I was amazed. I was quite amazed at the utter lack of interest, awareness of the fact that on a Saturday, like 10,000 women gathered downtown in Manhattan with, holding signs. Like, this stuff matters, and it,
the police have to come with a hose, and then they'd write something. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's, this is marginalized as a woman's issue, and it really isn't. Exactly. I mean, I don't know, Planned Parenthood is definitely an issue for the dude who recently got a friend of mine pregnant. Like, that's an issue for him. That's an issue for both of them.
Right. It just bewilders me how like making human beings has become a woman's issue. It's
right.
It's not a selfish act. It's not a frivolous thing. We're making human beings. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty basic biological function, but somehow it's been saddled on women and again, and it honestly makes me crazy.
Well, look, women do pay a higher price when it comes to sex and pregnancy. I mean, they
right,
do.
That's what I'm saying. But if the end goal is
all right, but that's never going to change. But when we have these discussions, I think, I want to see more funding for Planned Parenthood, and want to make sure that women have access to contraception and abortion. But here's the thing. We're doing something wrong. We have in New York City a 40% abortion rate. And it is 40% of all pregnancies are ending in abortion. And as we also know, nationally, 40% of children are born to single mothers. So I want to know, what are we doing wrong with family planning, even without cutting Planned Parenthood?
Let's try to do more in the schools. I mean, there's a lot we're doing.
We are, and things have only gotten worse.
Yeah.
Actually, that's not true. I think abortion rates have gone down slightly.
Yes, they have. I just took a hard look at infant mortality rates, which is truly a depressing activity here, because the United States lags far, far behind most industrial countries, and that is something. Whatever your feelings about abortion, getting good prenatal care is yes, it's a matter in part of a woman's behavior, but we know that having access to prenatal care helps a woman stop smoking, stop doing drugs, stop doing alcohol that will harm, a fetus, and to adopt the kind of healthier lifestyle that we know helps to aid in a healthy.
But those poor women couldn't get their abortions anyway because they wouldn't be paid for.
Right. So here, under the very nose of Congress, we have this
Right.
pretty sad statistic, and somehow we've just got to figure out how to get at this, because, I do believe that a woman has a right to choose during the early stages of pregnancy. I actually think Roe v. Wade got it right. We tend to think that it provided unfettered choice. It doesn't. It provides a sort of sliding scale. As the pregnancy goes farther along, the woman's rights lessen. And I think that is the way it should be. But no matter what, you want to make sure that if you're going to have children, that you get the kind of care so that you can have healthy babies. And in fact, if you want to cut the budget, that's a good thing to invest in, because caring for those sick children,
happen. Right. Look what we're doing
and that doesn't whip up the base.
No.
So, and it should.
Well, I think it's important for us to spend just a few moments talking about total pop culture stuff, don't you think? I mean, really.
Charlie
okay.
Sheen, right?
Yeah. Well,
That's
maybe
a whole other can of worms.
Maybe we'll leave him alone. But another celebrity who's made the news in an interesting way has been Natalie Portman.
So we're not really moving away from the topic.
That's right.
We're just
Best Actress for Black Swan. She spoke out in a very affirmative way after John Galliano, the Christian Dior designer, sort of said all his dumb things on video. What do you think about all of this?
Natalie Portman's a great role model. She's super smart. She is a very hard worker. She's very talented. Doesn't seem to take herself too seriously. Seems to, no one seems to have a bad word to say about her. And I think she's a great role model. Child out of wedlock notwithstanding. Sorry, Mike Huckabee. I love the fact that these politicians are like, well, we hate abortion, but we hate it when people get pregnant and then keep the baby and then go on national TV pregnant and win an Oscar. It's like, make a choice.
Well, she's also engaged to a man she seems to love a lot. I mean, she's not a single mom, really.
But there are a lot of women who are choosing to be single mothers these days, and that's, what bothers me more is the fact that our society uses these celebrities so much as role models. Yeah. She shouldn't be a role model. I'm really happy she spoke out. She clearly is very Jewishly identified, and this is not the only time she's shown that. But why do we want our kids to be like Natalie Portman?
Right.
Well, I think they could do worse than being like Natalie Portman, like educated, sort of like committed.
I agree.
And so this happened. I'm sure. I mean, listen, I have no window into her personal life, but I would bet that she probably didn't plan to get pregnant. That's like that, like at that time, it probably.
None of my business when she decided to get pregnant.
But these are choices that are made.
Okay. I'm gonna take Mike Huckabee's side. I'm sorry. Look. We have a major social problem in this country. It's a problem that adds to poverty rates. It's a problem that adds to inequality, and that is that 40% of all American children are born to unmarried mothers. Those children are more likely to be poor. They're not going to do as well in school. They're going to have more likely to have emotional problems, drug problems, and then we can go on and on.
That's not going to be true of Natalie Portman's child.
That will not be true of
Natalie or all these Upper West Side women.
Now wait a minute. Well, even when you control for education, mother's education, and income, and race, and control for all of those things, those children do not do as well. That's number one. Number two is, what are you saying to men? This gets back to my issue. If you're saying to men, you're kind of optional. We really, we'll do it by ourselves. It really doesn't matter. I don't know,
You think that's what they're saying? I think a lot of these women would love to have men in their lives who help.
I agree with you, but it reinforces the sense that they're not men. It reinforces for men the idea that really they're dispensable.
I totally disagree. I think it just reinforces the fact that, dude, if you're not going to step up, you're leaving me no choice, and I will step up twice as much because I have to.
You don't think, Rachel, it's been advertised as strong single mothers, as not,
as
you guys are not coming through.
Helpless single mothers?
African American mothers have always been strong in their families, always.
But still,
look what's happened to black men.
I'm not saying it has or it hasn't. I'm saying it's not.
I understand what Kay is saying, though, because if you take a hard look at the statistics, they're pretty pretty upsetting. And with all due respect to Natalie Portman, who I do think is beautiful and great, even though I didn't really want to see Black Swan.
I didn't see it either.
My goodness, why couldn't she and her fiance go to City Hall and get married?
But why should they? To satisfy whom?
To satisfy their
As
child.
a social signal.
But also, again, I agree with you. She's not my role model, and that's
what
not
about lesbian couples?
Let's put that
Should they
aside
go
for
get married too?
if they could.
If they could.
Right. If they
Look,
can't.
that
But
is a totally different
It's a different
issue.
thing.
I'm not
because
sure it is.
I'm not sure either.
It is. Here's why. Why do I think she should get married? Because you have a better chance of staying together for your children. And your children deserve two parents. And in my view, if those two parents aren't going to be the ideal, which is the man and woman who made you, then having the sort of close to the ideal to women who really care about you is a really good thing.
Well, does
I
it
think
not mean
like saying
anything that
there's no
she's
divorce.
engaged?
Yes,
I mean, that has to mean, right? I mean, she's at least halfway
Again,
there.
to whom, right?
Well, right, but still, I mean,
No,
if we're
but
worried
wait a
about
minute,
the social signal,
what
she
is
is
a
committing
social-
to be married.
She is, and that's much better. But in doing this research over the years about the breakdown of marriage and the connection to child rearing, childbearing, what you often find is people say they're engaged and then they really have they're never going to get married. Witness Bristol Palin.
About whom Mike Huckabee was, demonstrably silent. So
right.
if Mike Huckabee has a problem with, the 40% rate and the problems that come from it, then why isn't he interested in getting to the root of that problem? And abstinence is not the root of that.
Exactly.
What do you
Right.
think? But wait a minute. It has nothing to do with birth control. The problem of 40%. The problem has to do with a loss of trust in the institution of marriage.
Oh,
and
I
they
don't
probably
agree with
birth
that.
control
And access to it and education about it.
I do not agree with
Listen,
that.
the people who are, when you talk to young women, poor women who are getting pregnant and having babies, they don't say to you, oh, if only I could have found birth control. They have birth control. That's not the problem. These pregnancies are often sort of half intentional and half unintentional. It's not, I think, to imagine that somehow we're going to impose better family planning practices and then the problem is taken care of is absolutely
I think
false.
it's a continuum, and that's one element in a multifactorial situation that has been in this massive petri dish, that evolving over the decades. That's one element, and it's been demonstrable that access to birth control and access to education about birth control
Actually, no.
prevents pregnancy,
yes, it
prevents
has.
STDs,
I'm sorry.
prevents AIDS.
Look at the programs. Look at the research on sex ed programs. They have remarkably little success.
I haven't been researching the way you have. But
Tell me about the research. I mean, I've been studying.
I'm an
this for a long
advisor
time.
to an organization called TeachAIDS.org, and they work on putting accessible education plans together for developing countries around the world. And so I know that those education plans have an effect, that education makes a difference for the transmission of AIDS. So yes, absolutely rigorous studies, 100%. It's out of Stanford.
Yeah.
So while I haven't done the research you've done about pregnancy in this country, knowing that, I feel like I can extrapolate that and apply it and say that education helps. I don't know how it can help.
Education helps. But I think it's interesting to see how many of the single moms have children that were unwanted pregnancies versus what you're saying, more
It's a
casual
very
and
difficult thing to define because what does it mean to want the pregnancy? I mean,
Sure,
we have
right.
middle class
I mean, I guess there's
women.
levels of accident.
Yeah, exactly.
If you will,
Middle
yeah.
class women have a very clear sense of what family planning means. They know, I'm going to wait till I'm married. I'm going to wait till we've been married for this long, and I have my career. That is what planning means to us. But for a lot of women who don't have the same sense of a future orientation, it doesn't work like that.
But that's part of the point. I mean, it's like kids who get into big trouble because what else are they going to do? I mean, if you don't have anything to look forward to in this life, have babies and stay home and
I don't
do
think
whatever.
that's the way they see it.
Oh, I don't think they see possibilities.
Well, it's true. Without a college education in this country, without education in this country, you don't get it. But that's not the reason we have a 40% out of wedlock birth rate. Has nothing to do with
Out
that.
of wedlock.
What would you call it?
I would just say, hey, if only there was an organization about Planned Parenthood that we could all support. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, but they don't talk about this.
You know what, ladies? Even though I thought we were going to end on this fun note of celebrity talking, in fact, this episode of The Salon has been truly a wonderful conversation, and it has been a conversation. So to Kay Hymowitz and Elissa Strauss and Barbara Dobkin, thank you so much. And Rachel, great to have your voice in this.
Always a pleasure.
For all of us here at the Jewish Channel, I'm Jane Eisner. Please continue this conversation on the Sisterhood blog on forward.com. Thanks.